Welcome back to the channel. These stories are meant for late nights, quiet rooms, and headphones on. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin the first story. These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. Moving out felt like escape. Not freedom in the movie sense, not independence with a soundtrack playing behind it, more like finally being able to breathe without someone else's bad decisions filling the room. I moved out at 20, halfway through college, into a one-bedroom apartment in a town just outside Rochester, New York. Nothing fancy, an older building with thin walls, beige carpet that had seen better decades, and a rent price low enough to make me suspicious. But it was mine. The layout was simple. You walked in directly into a combined living and dining space. The kitchen branched off to the left, half separated by a wall that didn't quite reach the ceiling. A narrow hallway led past two closets. One I turned into a pantry, the other into storage, then the bathroom, and finally the bedroom at the end. The bedroom was bigger than I expected. Big enough for a queen bed, two dressers, a desk, and still space to pace when my brain wouldn't shut up. That mattered more than I realized at the time. The first few months were quiet, peaceful even. I worked part-time, went to class, came home, watched garbage TV, and slept like someone who finally wasn't listening for footsteps that weren't supposed to be there. Then one night, I brought someone home. Her name was Lily. We'd known each other through school for a while. Same major, same friend circles, nothing serious, just comfortable. We drank a little, watched a movie, laughed more than the movie deserved. At some point, we moved to the bedroom to finish it. Neither of us said anything, but we both passed out halfway through, still dressed, still buzzed. I woke up to the sound of movement. Footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed. Soft, careful steps in the hallway. For a split second, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered Lily. I looked to my side. The bed was empty. I sat up, heart racing, and listened. The footsteps moved toward the living room. I peeked through the bedroom doorway and saw Lily quietly collecting her things from the couch, shoes in hand, jacket folded over her arm. She was moving with that exaggerated silence people use when they don't want to wake someone up. She was leaving to avoid the morning after awkwardness. I didn't blame her. I stayed quiet, let her go. I heard the front door open, then close. I waited a minute, called her name softly, no response. I shut the bedroom door and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a sound I couldn't immediately place. A dull noise like something brushing against wood. My heart started pounding before my brain caught up. I sat up, staring at the open bedroom doorway. The hallway was dark, the living room beyond it even darker. I whispered Lily's name. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and texted her asking if she'd come back for something. The typing dots never appeared. That's when I noticed the door frame. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. A shape in the darkness, barely visible. Something darker than the dark around it. I raised my phone with shaking hands and turned on the flashlight. Two hands were wrapped around the edge of the door frame. Fingers curled inward, knuckles pale, nails short. Human hands. The moment the light hit them, they tightened, then pulled back, disappearing into the hallway. I screamed. Not a word, just sound, raw, panicked noise. I jumped out of bed and yelled for whoever it was to get out. My legs felt weak. The hallway was empty. I flipped on the bedroom light, then the hallway light, then the living room. Every light in the apartment burned at full brightness. I checked everything. Closets, bathroom, behind the couch, under the kitchen table, cabinets low enough for someone to crouch inside. Nothing. No one. I locked the front door. That's when it hit me. I never heard it open. I called Lily. She answered groggy and confused and swore she'd left over an hour ago. I didn't explain. I couldn't. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I walked back to the bedroom door frame. There were fingerprints, clear as day. 4 fingers on each side, exactly where I'd seen the hands. I took a photo. I moved out when the lease ended, but I never stopped thinking about one thing. Whoever it was didn't run. They waited.
I didn't call the police. That's the part people always latch onto when I tell this story now. They ask why, as if the answer should be obvious, as if fear automatically comes with clarity. It doesn't. Fear makes you minimize. It convinces you that reacting too strongly will somehow make things worse, that if you don't name what happened, it might shrink back into nothing. So I told myself it had been a mistake. Someone drunk, someone lost, someone who realized they were in the wrong apartment and panicked when I woke up. I scrubbed the fingerprints off the doorframe with a sponge and too much disinfectant. I told myself that if I erased the evidence, I could erase the event. For a while, it almost worked. The apartment went quiet again. No footsteps, no strange sounds. I started sleeping with the bedroom door closed, but I stopped locking it. I wanted to believe that what I'd seen was a fluke, a single bad night that didn't deserve to become a story. Then small things started shifting. It began with objects being out of place. A kitchen drawer left open when I was sure I'd closed it. A chair pulled slightly away from the table. The bathroom mirror angled differently than I remembered. Nothing dramatic, nothing definitive, just enough to make me second-guess myself. I blamed stress. Finals were coming up. I was working extra shifts. My sleep schedule was a mess. Anyone could forget where they left things. But then it happened with things I knew I hadn't touched. One evening, I came home and found the bedroom window unlocked. I never opened that window, ever. It faced the parking lot, ground level, with a narrow strip of grass separating it from the sidewalk. I'd made a point of keeping it locked because it made me uneasy. I stood there staring at it, my backpack still on my shoulders, heart thudding. The lock wasn't broken, just slid open. I locked it again and pulled the curtains tight. That night, I slept with the light on. A week later, my pantry closet smelled wrong. It was subtle at first, a sour, stale odor that didn't belong to any food I kept. I emptied the shelves, checked expiration dates, threw out anything questionable. The smell lingered. When I crouched down and pressed my face close to the back wall, I realized where it was strongest. The drywall. I tapped it with my knuckles. It sounded hollow in one spot, not dramatically so, just slightly different than the rest. Old buildings settle, I told myself. Still, I started checking my closets before bed. I'd open them fast, like ripping off a bandage, flood them with light, make sure nothing moved. Nothing ever did. That was the worst part. The sense that whatever was happening was adjusting itself around me, learning my habits, waiting until I stopped looking. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. I'd gone out to study at a cafe for a few hours. When I came back, my apartment felt lived in. Not messy, just disturbed. The couch cushion I always sat on was indented in a way that didn't match my body. The TV was off but warm. The air smelled faintly like someone else's soap. I walked to the bedroom, dread pooling low in my stomach. My bedspread was pulled back slightly as if someone had sat on the edge. That's when I noticed the closet door. It was open. I hadn't checked it that morning. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening. No sound. I reached into my pocket, wrapped my fingers around my keys, and held them between my knuckles like a weapon I didn't know how to use. Then I said, "Hello?" My voice shook. Nothing answered. I crossed the room and yanked the closet door open the rest of the way. It was empty, but the smell was there, stronger than before. Human, sweat, and something sour beneath it. On the floor, pressed into the carpet, was a flattened area shaped like a body. Someone had been lying there. I backed out of the room and left the apartment without locking the door. I sat in my car for nearly an hour staring at the building, watching people come and go, waiting for someone to leave who shouldn't. No one did. I finally called the non-emergency police line. I didn't know what else to do. They came, 2 officers, polite, tired, skeptical in the way people get when they've heard too many stories that don't end in anything solid. They searched the apartment, checked the closets, the windows, the pantry. One of them tapped the back wall and shrugged. "Old construction," he said. They took notes, suggested I stay with a friend for the night, told me to call if anything else happened. As they were leaving, one of them paused. "You said your friend left early that first night. Did she lock the door behind her?" "I don't know," I said. He nodded slowly. "Just something to think about." That night, I stayed at a friend's place. The night after that, I moved most of my valuables out. The apartment never felt safe again. Even in daylight, even with people around, it felt like a place that remembered something I was trying to forget. On my last night there, the one before I officially turned in my keys, I went back alone to clean. I left the lights on, all of them. As I was wiping down the kitchen counter, I heard a sound from the bedroom. A soft thud, then another. Slow footsteps. I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom doorway. I didn't move. I didn't speak. After a long, unbearable moment, they retreated, down the hallway, into the pantry. I heard the closet door close. I left the apartment and never went back inside. Months later, after I'd moved across town, I got a call from my old landlord. He sounded shaken. During renovations, they'd opened up the pantry wall to fix a leak. Inside the space between the walls, they found a makeshift sleeping area, blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a key. A copy of my apartment key. Whoever it was had never broken in. They'd been let in once, and they never really left. I don't live alone anymore. I double-check locks. I notice patterns. I trust discomfort when it whispers instead of waiting for it to scream. Some people think the scariest part is that someone was hiding in my apartment. It isn't. The scariest part is how easily they fit into the gaps of my life, how long they watched, and how patient they were. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet, not adventure. That distinction matters because what happened later had nothing to do with thrill-seeking or testing myself against nature. I chose the trail because it was familiar, regulated, and boring in the way safe places usually are. A long loop through managed forest land, marked campsites, ranger stations posted on maps, and enough foot traffic that you never really felt isolated. I arrived late afternoon, signed the trail register, and noted that 3 other solo hikers had checked in that day. I remember their handwriting more clearly than I should. One of them printed every letter carefully as if afraid of being misunderstood. The first miles were uneventful. Dry leaves underfoot, distant bird calls, the soft mechanical sound of my own breathing. I settled into the rhythm that always comes after an hour of walking, when thoughts stop tripping over each other and stretch out into something calmer. It was early evening when I smelled something wrong. At first, I thought it was rot, the sweet, sour smell of decay that sometimes drifts up from fallen logs. But this was sharper, chemical, like burned plastic mixed with damp soil. It came and went as I walked, never strong enough to locate, just enough to register as out of place. I stopped and listened. The forest was quiet, but not empty. Wind moved through the canopy. Something small scurried in the brush. No footsteps, no voices. I told myself it was nothing and kept moving. An hour later, I noticed the light. It was faint, barely visible through the trees on a ridge above the trail. A steady white glow, not flickering like a headlamp in motion. It stayed in the same place as I walked, keeping pace with me but never changing distance. I stopped again. The light stopped. That was when unease slid into something colder. Not panic, just awareness, the sense that I was no longer alone in the way I had assumed. I waved my hand once, experimentally. The light did nothing. I waited, then continued down the trail. The light resumed moving. I didn't call out. Calling out felt like an invitation. By the time I reached the designated campsite, the sun was gone.
The light on the ridge vanished with it, swallowed by darkness so complete it felt deliberate. The campsite was empty, firing cold, ground undisturbed. I set up my tent quickly, more focused on finishing tasks than enjoying the evening. When my headlamp swept across the trees, the smell returned, stronger now, close. I cooked, ate, and sat listening until full dark settled in. The forest shifted into night mode around me, sounds rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. That was when I heard the whistle. It was soft, tuneless, a single note repeated twice. Not a bird, not wind. I froze. It came again, closer this time, off the trail, to my left. I stood slowly and shined my light toward the sound. Nothing reflected back, no eyes, no movement. The whistle stopped. I packed up my food and locked it away, hands shaking enough that I dropped a carabiner twice. When I finally crawled into my tent, I zipped it closed with unnecessary force. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound felt amplified. Fabric shifted, branches snapped. Somewhere, stones clicked together, slow and intentional. I unzipped the tent a few inches and looked out. Along the edge of the campsite, just beyond the reach of my light, small stones had been arranged into a rough line. Not natural, not random, a boundary. I zipped the tent shut and lay still, counting breaths until the sounds faded. Sometime after midnight, I woke to footsteps. Slow, careful, circling. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The steps stopped near my head. I could sense the presence through the thin fabric, close enough that the space between us felt charged. Then a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not questioned, stated. I don't remember deciding to run. My body simply acted. I burst out of the tent, headlamp blinding the darkness, and sprinted toward the trail. Behind me, footsteps exploded into motion. I ran without direction, branches tearing at my arms, breath burning my throat. Fog rolled in suddenly, thick and disorienting, swallowing the beam of my light. I heard him stumble once, swear under his breath. Human. That was somehow worse. I kept running until my legs failed and the trail opened to a service road. Headlights appeared in the distance, and I stepped into the open, hands raised, shaking and half blind with fear. The ranger who stopped didn't ask many questions at first. He drove me to the station, gave me water, and listened. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You're the third this month." They never found anyone, but they closed the loop for the season. I don't hike alone anymore. Quiet isn't always empty. The report I filed that night felt inadequate. Words flattened the experience into something manageable, something procedural. The ranger wrote carefully, occasionally looking up at me as if gauging whether I was leaving anything out or inventing details to fill gaps in memory. I wanted to tell him about the way the forest felt organized against me, like a system responding to intrusion, but that sounded ridiculous even in my own head. They let me sleep in a bunk room near the station. The walls were thin and every creak made my muscles tense. At some point near dawn, I dreamed of the stones again, except this time they weren't marking a line. They were spelling something I couldn't read. In the morning, another ranger drove me back to the trailhead. My car sat alone, dusted with pollen, exactly as I had left it. No sign anyone had touched it. No sign anyone had ever been there at all. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the tree line. The forest looked harmless in daylight, inviting even. Sunlight filtered through the branches in clean, geometric patterns. Birds hopped along the edge of the lot, unconcerned. I asked if I could get my gear back. The ranger hesitated before answering. He told me a search team would retrieve it later. Standard protocol. Liability. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. I drove home in silence, replaying the night in fragments. The smell, the light, the way the footsteps had matched my pace before I ever noticed them. The detail that kept returning uninvited was the voice, how certain it sounded when it said my name. I checked the trail website that next week. The closure notice was vague. Environmental concerns, maintenance issues, no mention of safety. I emailed the ranger station once, asking if anything had been found. I never received a reply. Weeks passed, then months. Sometimes, late at night, I still think I hear that whistle. Always the same 2 notes. Always just faint enough that I question whether it's memory or something closer. I sold most of my camping gear. The tent went first. I couldn't stand to look at it without seeing the outline of a shape on the other side of the fabric, close enough to breathe against. Friends ask me why I stopped hiking. I give them practical reasons: work, time, other interests. None of them have asked me about the scar on my forearm, a thin white line where a branch cut deeper than it should have. None of them know that sometimes when I walk alone at night, streetlights seem to hold their brightness a little too steadily, as if something is keeping pace, just out of sight, waiting for me to notice again. I still think about the other names in that trail register. I tried searching them online, quietly, carefully. One had moved overseas. One account went dark shortly after that season. The third never appeared anywhere at all. That might not mean anything. It probably does. But sometimes I wonder if the forest doesn't just watch, doesn't just follow. Sometimes I wonder if it practices, learning voices, learning paths, learning patience. And if I hadn't run when I did, whether my name would still be written somewhere, neat and careful, waiting to be read. I check my locks twice now, listen harder, and never assume silence means safety. Not ever again. At all.
The weeks after that night were a strange mix of relief and lingering paranoia. I thought I had escaped whatever had been trailing me in the forest, but the fear didn't leave entirely. Every time I drove past wooded areas, my stomach twisted. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, I flinched. Even in my apartment, I noticed little things. A window slightly ajar, a shadow stretching longer than it should, a creak that didn't match the house's usual sounds. My friends noticed my jumpiness, but I couldn't tell them the full story. It sounded insane if you weren't there. One Friday night, I got a call from my old college buddy, Tyler. He was home for the weekend and invited me to a small get-together at his apartment. I hesitated. Bars and crowds felt safer than forests now, oddly enough. I wanted people around, not empty spaces or long shadows, but I needed to feel normal, so I agreed. Tyler lived in a slightly older building downtown, one with narrow hallways and dim lighting in the stairwells. My unease didn't fade as I parked and walked inside. The building's creaks and echoes amplified my tension. The apartment was cozy, the kind of place where mismatched furniture and thrift store art made it feel lived in. Tyler greeted me at the door, laughing about some late-night video game session. I forced a smile and joined him inside. His friends were scattered around the room, half playing cards, half lounging with beers. The conversation was casual, easy. I laughed when I was supposed to and nodded when they spoke, but a tight knot of unease never left my chest. A few hours in, Tyler suggested a game of truth or dare. It was casual, nothing extreme, a way to get everyone talking, he said. I agreed, partly to distract myself from the creeping unease. The dares were silly at first: send a text to a random contact, do a funny dance, eat a spoonful of hot sauce. But then the game shifted, subtly, as the bottle turned to me. Truth or dare? Tyler asked, his grin slightly too wide. Truth, I said, hoping for something simple. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Ever been really, really scared, like truly terrified? I swallowed. I wanted to say no, but then I remembered the forest, the light, the footsteps, the voice calling my name. I could tell no one else in the room could understand it. Yeah, I said finally, I have. The group chuckled lightly and moved on. Relief washed over me. Maybe it would pass now, I thought. But later that night, as everyone dozed off on couches and floor mats, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the trail, the stones, the voice calling my name. I stepped outside for some air. The city smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, a strange comfort compared to the damp, earthy smell of the forest. I leaned against the railing of the small balcony, looking down at the quiet street. That's when I heard it again. The whistle.
2 faint notes, exactly the same pattern from that night months ago. I froze. My stomach turned. I scanned the street below. Nothing moved. Cars were parked in their usual spots. The glow from streetlights stretched lazily across the asphalt, illuminating nothing unusual. My heart hammered in my chest. Maybe it was a coincidence, a memory echoing in my head. Maybe. Then I heard footsteps behind me on the balcony. Slow, deliberate, heavy, almost dragging. I spun around. No one there. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. My thumb hesitated. The memory of the forest made my fingers tremble. I answered anyway. Silence. Then faintly, almost imperceptibly, my own laughter from the party earlier warped, slowed, and warped again. The sound wasn't coming from the phone. It was around me, as if the air itself had learned to mimic it. My breath hitched. I ran inside, slammed the balcony door, locked it. My friends were all asleep, oblivious. I paced, trying to convince myself it was stress, paranoia, residual fear. But deep down, I knew better. The rational explanations had run dry the day I saw the black mass in Cody's basement, or the night the stones lined the forest floor. The following day, I called the local police, explained the situation. I was careful not to sound hysterical, only factual. They suggested I file a report about the harassment and unknown calls. Nothing came of it for weeks. They said anonymous calls are difficult to trace. I knew that. The calls weren't anonymous in the sense of origin. They were targeted, precise. Someone knew my patterns, my fears, my habits. A month later, I received a letter. No return address, just a single sheet of paper, blank, except for a faint grid of lines pressed into it, like fingerprints. I stared at it for what felt like hours. Then I noticed a faint outline of something written along the crease. A name, mine, and underneath a time, 3:18 a.m. My stomach sank. 3:18 a.m. was the exact time I had bolted from the forest months ago. Someone or something had been keeping track, marking it. I started sleeping in shifts, leaving lights on, checking locks obsessively. I even installed security cameras outside my apartment. I tried to convince myself it was enough, but deep down I knew cameras couldn't catch someone who knew how to move silently, who could wait, observe, and manipulate time itself. Then came the night of the power outage. My city block went dark, unexpectedly. Apartment buildings, streetlights, everything. I was home alone, and the silence was almost complete, broken only by the low hum of my refrigerator. I lit candles, but kept one flashlight in hand, moving cautiously through my apartment. Every shadow felt like a figure, every floorboard grown a step behind me. I reached the living room. Nothing out of place. The window was closed, the door locked. I exhaled, letting the tension ebb slightly. And then my phone rang. No number. I didn't answer. I shouldn't have. A tapping sound began at the window. Light at first, soft and irregular, then harder, faster. A rhythm. Someone was there, outside, waiting, watching. I grabbed a metal lamp, crept to the window, and peeked through the curtain slit. Empty. The glass was unbroken. A single branch swayed gently in the wind. I laughed shakily at my own fear. Must be my imagination. Then the tapping came from the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze, heart racing. The security cameras were dead from the outage. I had no backup. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The final knock was different, heavier, deliberate, as if someone was testing the strength of the door. My thumb hovered over the deadbolt, and then silence. I called the police, waited, trembling, flashlight clutched tight. When they arrived, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no indication anyone had been there. Just me, shaking, staring at a door that hadn't moved. Weeks passed. Normalcy returned in a fragile, delicate way. I started leaving my apartment again. I walked the streets at night cautiously, always alert. I never hiked alone again. I never returned to the trail. I stopped answering unknown calls.
But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faintest whistle. 2 notes, just enough to make me pause. Just enough to remember the forest, the footsteps, the way the air itself seemed alive with awareness. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, watching, waiting, for me to forget again. And when I do, I know it will return. Ever since I was a kid, I had this obsession with having my own place. The idea of leaving home was almost romantic to me, not because I disliked my parents in a petty way, but because living under their roof felt like a cage. My dad, a traveling sales rep, was rarely sober on weekends, and my mom was constantly distracted with her friends and outings. Arguments, loud music, and drunken rants filled my childhood, and by the time I hit high school, I was already planning my escape. The thought of bringing friends, or worse, girls, into that chaos was unbearable. By the time I turned 19, I was ready. I wasn't going to a distant college. I stayed local because I didn't have the funds to go away. Instead, I scoured Craigslist, Zillow, and Facebook Marketplace, desperate for a small rental I could call my own. When I finally found one, I knew instantly. It was a modest 1-bedroom apartment in the east side of town. The layout was perfect: an open living and dining area, a kitchen separated by a short wall, and a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. 2 closets lined the hallway, one for pantry items and one for general storage. The bedroom itself was large enough for a queen-sized bed, dressers, a TV, and even a small desk. I signed the lease immediately. Moving in was liberating. No parents, no judgment, just my space, my rules. At first, it was perfect. I spent nights playing video games, watching TV, and hanging out with friends, relishing the freedom. A few months in, one night I went out with friends and ran into a girl I'd known casually in school. Let's call her Riley. We ended up back at my apartment, drinking and watching a movie. Nothing too intense happened. Riley didn't want to go further, and I respected that. Eventually, we fell asleep in the bedroom. I woke later to faint footsteps in the hallway. Riley was up, gathering her things quietly to leave without awkwardness. I didn't interfere, just watched her slip out and shut the door softly behind her. I crawled back into bed, assuming that was the end of it. Then came the scream. I woke to the unmistakable sound of hands scraping against the bedroom doorframe. Someone had wrapped their hands around it, and the pressure tightened as if trying to pull themselves inside. I froze, my heart hammering, then screamed, "Get out! Get out!" I bolted upright, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam down the hallway. Empty. Closet doors, bathroom, living room, nothing. The front door was still shut, and the apartment was silent, a sign for my ragged breathing. I called Riley. She had already left hours ago. She hadn't returned or even lingered outside. I called my best friend, Matt, explaining what had happened, and he tried to calm me down, suggesting it might have been a drunk hallucination, but it wasn't. Later, when I examined the doorframe, there were clear fingerprints pressed in the exact position of the hands I saw that night. Someone had been in my apartment, and they'd done it intentionally, just to terrify me. After that, I upgraded apartments and never looked back. But growing up alone at my parents' house had shaped me. I ate dinner alone. I watched TV alone. I became accustomed to silence and solitude. My parents weren't neglectful. They were just absent, preoccupied with their own lives. By the time I was 16, I was essentially living alone, which made the terror of that night in my apartment all the more vivid. I had learned to handle solitude, but that night proved it could also leave you vulnerable. Years later, during a weekend when my parents were both out, I found myself home alone once again. I made dinner, watched TV, and settled into my bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. My room was at the far end, the bathroom and linen closet were nearby, and my parents' room sat just off the landing. I kept my door slightly open, a habit I'd developed to hear the house, like a background hum, to make being alone feel less isolating. Around 11 p.m., I shut my laptop and scrolled on my phone. An hour passed, and then it rang. No caller ID. My pulse jumped. I hesitated, but curiosity, or perhaps nervousness, won out, and I answered. Silence, then faintly the sound of a TV playing in the background. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I realized the sound matched my TV downstairs perfectly in real time. Whoever was on the other end was inside my house, downstairs, listening to every sound.
I bolted upright, heart racing. Footsteps creaked from below, matching the audio on the phone. The doorknob rattled. Someone was testing it. I panicked, locked my door, and called my uncle who lived nearby. He stayed on the line as I listened, the phone picking up every step and movement downstairs. Whoever it was hung up suddenly. Then I heard them move away from the door. Relief was brief. My uncle arrived minutes later, and together we called the police. We checked every corner, every closet, every cabinet. Empty. The front door had been left open, a silent warning, perhaps. The police traced the calls eventually, discovering they originated from someone I'd known in high school, an acquaintance who claimed his phone had been stolen days prior. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The fear, the invasion, the knowledge someone had been in my private space, it stayed with me. That experience changed me. I became hyper-aware, checking locks obsessively, avoiding being alone at night, leaving lights on, installing security cameras. Yet the terror never fully dissipated. Shadows moved in ways that made me flinch. Unknown calls made my hands shake. And even in broad daylight, the memory of those hands on my door, the sound of my TV echoed over the phone, kept me on edge. One weekend, my friends and I went out to a party at Cody's house. He had a basement where we could pregame without disturbing anyone. I was cautious, keeping my distance from the dark corners. Late that night, after the alcohol had dulled my senses, I fell asleep on the pull-out couch. When I woke, it was still dark. My mouth was dry and my head pounding. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the cable box and the faint green light of Cody's mini fridge. That's when I saw it, a black shape in the corner of the basement. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a jacket draped over a chair. But the longer I stared, the more it moved. A person. I froze, then forced myself to act casual, muttering complaints about being thirsty. I edged toward the stairs slowly, careful not to alert whoever or whatever it was. Halfway up, I glanced back. The figure was at the bottom of the stairs. I almost tripped, adrenaline surging. I bolted to Cody's room, yelling him awake that someone was in the basement. We ran to his parents' room, woke his dad, and checked the basement together. The door was open, the back door was ajar. Police were called, neighbors stirred. The terror of that basement, that black mass, haunted me for hours after. Even now, months later, I can't enter basements without recalling that night. The fear lingers like a shadow. Every creak of the floor, every faint movement in the dark brings me back to the sensation of being watched, pursued, invaded. The world feels smaller after nights like that. The places you think are safe suddenly impossible to trust. I learned that safety is fragile and solitude can be dangerous. The memory of that figure, the silent presence in my apartment and in Cody's basement, has followed me ever since. I don't know what it was or why it chose me, but I know it's patient. It waits in corners, in shadows, in the moments when we think we're alone. And I know one day, if I let my guard down, it will return. The morning after that night in Cody's basement, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My muscles ached, my head throbbed, and my heart still raced from the adrenaline. Cody's parents had double-checked the doors and windows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that basement could have returned the moment we left. I stayed the night at Cody's room, unwilling to be alone, and I realized then that the fear didn't just come from shadows or shapes. It came from knowing that someone or something had crossed into spaces I thought were safe. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur. I avoided being alone, leaving lights on in every room and checking locks obsessively. Even my friends noticed my anxiety. They tried to brush it off, teasing me for being paranoid, but they hadn't seen what I had. They didn't feel the silent weight in the corner of the basement, the way that figure had watched me move, had tracked me up the stairs. I kept replaying the image in my mind, black, faceless, enormous. Not a mask, not a shadow, something human-shaped, yet wrong, something that didn't belong. When Monday came, I went to work as usual, trying to act normal, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the basement. I kept thinking about the small, confined spaces where someone could hide. The thought of someone watching me sleep, waiting silently, made my stomach twist. Even in the light of day, the fear lingered. I avoided going into basements for weeks, avoiding places like storage rooms or even the laundry room in my own apartment. Every dark corner became a potential hiding spot. Every creak or thump in the walls or floor made me flinch. I became hyper aware of my surroundings in a way that bordered on obsession. One evening, a few weeks after the basement incident, I was home alone again. My parents were away on a weekend trip, and I had planned a quiet night in with some leftover Chinese food and a few beers. I was scrolling through my phone in the living room when I heard it, a faint creak, almost imperceptible from the hallway. I froze. My brain immediately flashed back to the night at Cody's. I wasn't drunk this time, and I wasn't hallucinating. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the couch, my only defense, and crept toward the hallway, listening intently. The house was silent again. Too silent. My parents' house had always had its character, old wood floors that groaned, the occasional pipe rattle, but this was different. The creak didn't repeat. I told myself it was the floorboards settling, but as I took another step, I saw it. A shadow moving at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the bathroom door. I froze, my heart pounding. The shadow didn't have a clear shape, just a black mass, amorphous yet undeniably present. My first instinct was to run, but my mind screamed to stay calm, to analyze, to survive. I grabbed my phone and called my uncle immediately. I whispered into the receiver, explaining what I saw, trying to keep my voice steady. He instructed me to stay on the line and move to a locked room. I obeyed, retreating to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me and locking it. My hands shook as I clutched the phone. The shadow didn't move after I left, but I could feel its presence as if it was waiting just beyond the door. My uncle stayed on the line until the police arrived, guiding me, giving me instructions, trying to keep me calm. When the officers arrived, we conducted a thorough search. Every room, every closet, every cabinet was checked. There was no sign of forced entry this time, no footprints, nothing. Yet the feeling remained, the lingering impression that someone had been there, had watched, had chosen to vanish without a trace. The officers suggested it could be a trespasser who had learned my routines, someone who slipped in when they thought the house was empty. It made sense on paper, but it didn't explain the terror, the almost supernatural precision with which I had sensed the presence. In the weeks that followed, I became paranoid. I installed security cameras in every room, a full alarm system, and motion-activated lights outside. Every unusual sound made my pulse spike. I stopped inviting friends over at night. I avoided being alone. Even at college, I would check my apartment multiple times before going to bed, turning on every light, making noise, trying to convince myself the space was safe. And yet, deep down, I knew nothing could truly erase that memory. The memory of a figure standing silently in a dark corner, waiting. Then, several months later, it happened again. But this time, it wasn't at my parents' house. It was at my own apartment, the one I had carefully secured, the one I thought I had made completely safe. I had just moved in after graduating college and was unpacking boxes in the living room. It was late, around midnight. The place was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I was scrolling through my phone in the living room when I heard it, a faint creak, almost imperceptible from the hallway. I froze. My brain immediately flashed back to the night at Cody's. I wasn't drunk this time, and I wasn't hallucinating. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the couch, my only defense, and crept toward the hallway, listening intently. My apartment was small. There was no way someone could be walking without me hearing it. I grabbed my phone and dialed my uncle, but before I could speak, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a whisper, almost imperceptible, drifted from the bedroom. "I see you." I dropped the phone in shock, fumbling for the light switch. When I flicked it on, nothing. The bedroom was empty. Closets, drawers, under the bed, nothing. And yet, I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could feel the presence. Over the next few weeks, these incidents escalated. At first, it was subtle. Doors left slightly open, objects moved, faint sounds in the middle of the night. Then, more blatant. Footsteps echoing in empty rooms, shadows at the edges of my vision, whispers just beyond comprehension. I started sleeping with a bat under my bed, cameras recording everything, and a playlist of white noise to mask sounds. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was inside my home when I was supposed to be alone. One night, around 2 in the morning, I awoke to the unmistakable sound of my apartment door unlocking. Heart hammering, I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way. I crept to the living room, bat in hand, flicked on every light and listened. Footsteps moved across the room, stopping just beyond the kitchen counter. My cameras caught nothing. I yelled, demanding whoever it was reveal themselves. Silence. Then a whisper, barely audible. "I can see you." I bolted to my bedroom, locking the door, my breath ragged. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until the police arrived. When they finally searched the apartment, there was no one there. No forced entry, no sign of anyone at all. The cameras hadn't captured anything unusual, the locks were intact, and yet the feeling, the awareness of an intruder remained undeniable. I moved again, trying to escape the memories and the fear. Each time I would set up cameras, alarms, and locks, but no matter how secure the space seemed, I could feel it. A presence in the corner of my eye, a shadow at the edge of my vision. I became obsessive, scanning each room before sleep, leaving lights on, checking every sound. I avoided basements entirely. I stopped staying home alone. The idea of being trapped alone with a silent observer terrified me more than anything else. Years passed. I eventually graduated from college, found a stable job, and moved into a larger apartment. I tried to live normally, but I couldn't escape the fear instilled by those nights. I learned to sleep with lights on, to check doors twice, to always have an escape plan. I avoided isolated areas, particularly basements and attics. Shadows, corners, and darkened rooms always made me pause. The memory of that faceless black figure in Cody's basement never faded. The whispering, the footsteps, the presence, it followed me, a shadow I could never outrun. And then, one night, the worst happened. I was alone, finishing some work at my desk when my phone rang. No caller ID. My hands shook as I answered. Silence. Then, faintly, a whisper. "I see you." I dropped the phone, grabbing my bat, and ran to the living room. Shadows moved, impossible to explain. And as I stared into the corner, I realized this wasn't over. I called my uncle again, as I had countless times before, and he reassured me, though I could hear the concern in his voice. I stayed on the line until sunrise, waiting, alert, heart racing. The figure never appeared in full view, never made a move, but the awareness, the sheer knowledge that it had been there remained undeniable. I started to understand that this entity, whatever it was, didn't need to interact directly. The fear itself was the goal. It existed in the corners, in the silence, in the moments when you were most vulnerable. After that night, I stopped pretending I could ignore it. I accepted that it was part of my life now, a shadow always lingering just out of sight, waiting. I reinforced my apartment with locks, cameras, and alarms, but I stopped believing in complete safety. Sleep became a negotiation, solitude a risk, shadows a threat. Even now, years later, I check the corners, the stairwells, the edges of rooms before settling down. I've learned to live with the presence rather than confront it. It watches, it waits. And I've learned, sometimes the thing that terrifies you the most isn't something you can fight. It's something that simply exists, patient, silent, unseen, and utterly relentless.